Hello and welcome to this recorded webinar on snails and vineyards. My name is Richard Fennessy and I'm a grape and wine research scientist with the Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development, or DPIRD. May I start by noting that DPIRD acknowledges the traditional custodians of country, the Aboriginal people of the many lands that we work on and their language groups throughout Western Australia, and recognises their continuing connection to the lands and waters. DPIRD respects the continuing culture of Aboriginal people and the contribution they make to the life of our regions. We pay our respects to elders, past, present and emerging. In this webinar, you'll be hearing from DPIRD Technical Officer Yui Lau, who, like me, is based at DPIRD's Bunbury office. Yui has recently completed an activity to better understand the biology of the brown garden snail in WA vineyards and to demonstrate the effectiveness of baiting. I'd like now to introduce Yui and for her to present her findings.
Hello, I'm Yui Lau, Technical Officer from DPIRD. So thank you, Richard, for your introduction. Today I'm presenting the demonstration of effective snail management technique in wine grape vineyard. Snails have been a persistent issue for around 20 years in vineyard across WA. They can be spread easily if there is insufficient biosecurity measures. For example, they can be easily transported by fruit picking bin from vineyard to vineyard. Snail can affect the yield by damaging buds, cans, and foliage, as well as the quality of the wine by contaminating the fruit. Anecdotally, it is believed producers are failing to bait at the correct timing, mainly because post-vintage respite coincides with the beginning of snail activity. The scope of this project is to improve producers' understanding and raise awareness of effective snail management methods through demonstrating different bait product and application timing. Brown garden snail are the target species for this activity, as they found to be the most common snails that cause damage in mature vineyards across regions. First of all, we will briefly introduce brown garden snail. They originate from Mediterranean region, introduced into Australia around 120 to 150 years ago. They can move as far as 47 meters an hour, and the ideal temperature for them are 7 to 28 degrees, humidity 75 to 90%, which is our typical autumn or spring weather. They can also stay dormant by sealing themselves with a membrane of dry mucus during extreme weather. Their average lifespan is between 3 to 5 years. Snail breeding activity mostly happen in warm and moist conditions. After mating, sexually mature adult snail will lay eggs within 2 weeks. Those eggs can hatch between 10 to 21 days. It usually takes around 1 to 2 years for juvenile snails to become sexually mature adult. There was a lab trial done with highly favorable condition, and the 1 to 2 year time was shortened to 6 months. Therefore, without timely control, one snail can reproduce more than 480 eggs in a year. In this project, 3 activities were carried out. Lab trial is to compare the effectiveness between 5 different baits. Field demonstration is to see the effectiveness between 2 baits on the market, which are conventional bait and organic product. Dissection activity is to investigate the snail life cycle in the vineyard. In the lab trial, we were comparing 5 different baits. The design was to have 10 snails per enclosure and 3 replicates per treatment. Snails of various sizes were collected from a bait and spray-free vineyard and multiple home gardens. They were then fasted on a moistened cotton bed sheet for 48 hours. Bait were applied, and then 48 hours later, the bait were removed, dry, weighed to calculate the quantity of bait consumed. Mortality rate was counted at day 7 because sometimes it could take a while to see the actual death. And here is the list of bait used. We use chicken powder as the control. Protectors is the popular organic product in the vineyard with stomach action. 3 different concentrations of metaldehyde product and the basil, which is methyl carb, are baked with nerve action. Here are the photos of each treatment from day 1. It was literally a snail hunger game. Snail were placed in the middle of the enclosure and bait were laid around the snail to encourage consumption because sometimes they might not have great appetite and they won't eat the bait. So this is the photo taken 48 hours after bait application. In the control, we can still see the snails were still active and try to escape from the enclosure. Other baits have caused snail looking sick and inactive. In the basil treatment, the snail actually all look floppy. The result from the lab trial shows all the bait were effective compared to control. All the bait, except for slug-off, caused significantly more snail to die than control. Protectors caused the highest death rate, followed by basil. Metaldehyde-based bait with different concentrations did not cause significantly different mortality rates, which are those 3 baits. Looking at the average bait consumption rate per treatment, there is significantly less bait consumed than control. Protectors was consumed much more than all the other baits, and there is no strong relation between the amount of bait consumed and the mortality rate. According to snail and slug expert Michael Nash, he said the result is imply the different bait palatability and mode of action. For example, when snail eat the metaldehyde or methyl carb bait, they will feel sick and stop eating, and sometimes because they actually feel sick, so they don't eat enough to a lethal dose, and so in the end they won't die. The next is field demonstration. We were trying to see the effectiveness of 2 different bait products, which are organic iron complex based bait and conventional bait, which contains metaldehyde. A typical block with high snail population in Margaret River were used for this activity. With help from Max Liger from Kawarama Agency, bait were applied manually 3 times in a year in March, May, and September with the following rate. Protectors is 15 kilo per hectare and metakill is 10 kilo per hectare. The trial design is randomized between bait product and timing. So there are 2 observations done in this activity. The first is the snail death number within microcosm, which is located in panel 4. And the second one is counting snail numbers in the monitoring panel, which is in panel 3. Advised by deeper entomologist Svetlana, microcosms were made and put under the vine just before bait treatment, plus a control area receiving no bait. Microcosms were used to simulate the actual environment in the vineyard while controlling the number of snails we are counting. 20 snails are from the adjacent block and snail count 1 week after bait application. The result of this activity shows baits are effective and the 2 baits appear to have similar efficacy. It's actually a bit difficult to comment on the best bait timing because there are a few variables such as weather event influencing the snail activities. And also we have to note that the main data was unexpectedly disturbed by sheep activities within the block, and potentially they allow some of the enclosed snails to escape. The second field activity were counting snail in the canopy and vineyard floor within the monitoring panels, which was done at 3 timing before baiting, day 2 and day 7. We can see in this photo the snails are actually eating the metakill bait, and on the day 7 protectors photo we can see the snail already turning upside down and also turning back, and in the metakill photo we can see the snail spitting out bubbles. In this graph we can see the snail number increase from March to September, which correlated with increasing frequency of rain event. This graph shows more detail about the snail numbers we observed. So we can see no snail in the canopy in March, which is because the mechanical harvester just been through the vineyard a couple days before the counting activity. There were also relatively low numbers found on the vineyard floor and field death. May population increased, but very few signs of snail death after the bait were applied. In September, we observed an influx of snail in the canopy and on trunks, and 7 days after baited treatment, we can see a decline in snails on the vine and almost equal proportion of the dead snail to those remaining on the vine. There's a trend that the number of snail in the canopy gradually increased from March to September, which indicate their movement. During counting, it was observed that there were no small snails, which is shown with shorter than 10 mm in March. However, many snails of this size were observed in May and September. More medium-sized snails between 10 to 15 mm shell widths from May to September, which indicate that snails have been mating, laying egg, hatching into juvenile, and grow up in size. The last is the dissection activity. 20 mature snails were collected from the trial vineyard. The shell width is between 15 to 31 mm, and this collection was done monthly. Albumen gland and shell width were measured. So the albumen gland indicates snail breeding capability. Its role is to produce a nutritive secretion onto fertilized eggs, and consequently will increase in size before a snail lays its eggs. Contrary to this, the lack of gland development indicates inactive egg production. So here here are the photos of the dead snails and the albumen gland, and usually it's located around here. The result from the dissection activity shows there's a positive relation between the shell width and the albumen gland length. All the snails without visible gland are under 25 mm shell width. Looking at the albumen gland size over time, they peak in March, which indicate the greatest number of snails were laying egg, and the average size of snail each month are quite consistent. Just a note here, we observe that juvenile snails are much easier to find than large ones in June, July, and August. In fact, before we start the dissection, we assume there will be a clear seasonal cycle of the albumen gland size. The research done in the grain industry for small pointed snail shows there is peak and low point for albumen gland size. And also, it's often reported that they only breed once per year. Gland size in vineyard also peak around March, but not with huge size variation between seasons, which indicate the snail is able to breed throughout the year if the right condition is present. And this has big implications on management strategies. The following observations were made during the field activities. Active egg-laying activities already started beginning of March in 2021, which coincided with significant rainfall event. We can see in this photo, in this corner, these are the snail eggs. Actually, this photo was taken on the 5th of March, and there was 38mm rain on the 4th of March. In wintertime, more small active snails, and most snails were located on vine trunks, with larger ones in the activation phase. In springtime, they tend to move into the vine canopy and increase variability in size. In summer, some snails are still active near the drip line and trunk, and the dormant snails were predominantly observed in the ground cover beneath the vines. In January, we collected around 20 activating snails in the vineyard out of curiosity, and noticed they can be reactivated in an hour after we put them in moistened container. Those snails were dissected and found to have large albumin gland. So we assume they can opportunistically reactivate and start laying egg under favorable conditions. Observation within the vineyard of egg laying in March and increase in visible population in September may suggest shorter development period when conditions are wet. In conclusion, enlarged albumin gland was present in most large brown garden snail, which have bigger than 25mm shell width throughout the year, which indicate that mature snails are able to lay egg when favorable conditions occur. For example, a nice rainfall, bringing the moisture level up. Initial results from complementary research located across South Australian orchards and vineyards support these findings. This shows regular monitoring, timely baiting, especially when the snails are active and before laying eggs, and adequate application rate are important to suppress snail population and to avoid heavy infestations. Also, the bait characteristics have to be considered while monitoring effectiveness and planning reapply frequency. This demonstration was limited to one site, 1 year of observations, and with no replicates. However, this work does show interesting insight into brown garden snail life history in a WA vineyard. Further research is required to advance the understanding of snail biology in WA vineyard and investigate the opportunities for new management strategies. This activity was funded through Wine Australia Regional Program, which is administered by Wines of WA, supported by Mike Sleeger at Caroma Agency and Mike Gray from AHA Viticulture in providing access to a site and bait product is also greatly appreciated. Dr. Michael Nash and Dr. Sally Filota are thanked for their input. I also thank for the technical advice and support from deeper entomologist Svetlana Michik, applied statistician Andrew Van Bogle, and Richard Fennessy. Thank you for listening to the presentation today. For further information or any questions, please contact me or Richard on the following email. I'll hand it back to Richard now.
Thank you, Yui, for sharing your findings. This work has also been published in the 2021 December and 2022 June editions of the department's wine industry newsletter. Those not familiar with our newsletter, you can subscribe and access past editions at agric.wa.gov.au and searching for wine industry newsletter to read news on R&D activities relevant to the WA wine industry. Thanks for joining us, and goodbye.